First time in my life where I started hearing, you don't really look like an Indian girl.
Touch me one more time, yeah. Brush me one more time. Could I really make you love me? Could I really make you love me? Yeah. Kiss me.
Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This is Sam Era here again. I'm just in my kitchen / living room because I'm sitting right in between. But anyway, I just wanted to get into the topic of this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave here today. And is a video I wanted to make for a while. I'm fairly sure it's going to be relatively controversial, so I'm of course a little bit nervous about it. And I kind of sat in my room avoiding talking all day today, but I figured, hey, there's no time like the present. I want to talk to you today a little bit about ethnic ambiguity and how those of us in society who come off as ethnically ambiguous do benefit from this. So first off, I just want to say that I do dedicate this video to anybody out there who has met someone brand new for the first time, and the first thing that they ask you is the question, what are you? And if you've ever asked them that question, I strongly encourage you to think about just how inconsiderate that comes off. And you know, it's normal to have curiosity. We all have curiosity about things, but there's also appropriate and adult ways to phrase things when you're speaking to people. And you know, you don't have to be offensive. You can still get your questions answered, because that's not the problem. The problem isn't having a question. The problem is how you go about it. So I want to start off first just by giving you a little bit of an insight into my history. So my ethnic background is Indian. My parents have done 23andMe. I haven't personally done it, but with what my parents have found with 23andMe, it seems though my dad is mostly majority Parsi Indian, which is Persian Indian origins, and my mom is Indian with some slight Mongolian influence and roots within her DNA as well. So, but I'm fully Indian. So when I was growing up, I did grow up in a predominantly white high school, so there was not a lot of people that really looked like me, and so growing up, you know, I was called a lot of names. I would get the what are you question a lot. People would make fun of my lips, and I always had bigger lips even as a baby, so that's kind of something that people weren't used to. Or they would ask me, why are your lips that color? Because my lips weren't you know, more pale color that people were used to. I didn't love it. It made me really uncomfortable in my skin. And I remember in middle school, you know, it was not the easiest of times, but you know, I transitioned into high school, and in high school I slowly built more confidence. I kind of was cool with just being the kid who did well at school and sang, and that was who I was in high school, and that was what I was known for primarily. And you know, that was honestly completely totally fine with me. So when I kind of started to notice a lot of changes was in college. So in college, I kind of basically looked essentially like what I look like now. This was the first time in my life where I started hearing, you don't really look like an Indian girl. Or I've met Indian girls before and none of them really look like you. Are you sure you're Indian? And I would be like, yep, I'm sure I'm Indian. Yeah. And a lot of times people would ask me if I was Hispanic, would ask me if I was Egyptian or some other kind of Middle Eastern. And people would also ask me if I was half white and half black as well. So these were all questions that I would get asked, and then, you know, I'd have to, it would still start with the what are you question, and, you know, I would go into the explanation of what I actually am, and I would tell people, and I mean, I guess they bought it, I don't know. I mean, it was the truth, there wasn't anything to buy, but it always seemed like they were doubting me a little bit. So yeah, that was interesting, and very, very weird. So I would say after college, when I started to do music. So when I started to do music was kind of where this shift sort of happened. Mind you, we're in 2020 now, and if you think about the music industry in 2020, it is predominantly Black artists or artists who are heavily influenced by Black or African American culture. That is just the truth. There's no denying the influence that Black and African American culture have had in the music industry, and there has always been a large amount of influence of the Black culture in the music industry. Now, what is different now than it was 5, 10, 20 years ago is that you see a lot more African American artists representing their own culture and their own music, instead of you kind of getting this manipulated way of representing the cultural elements that they would bring to the table in the music industry. But we're now getting a sort of convoluted representation of it through someone who is white, or even ethnically ambiguous. But nowadays, if you go look at the top 40, most of those artists are Black themselves. So it is a positive change that I think has been made. You kind of do see this transformation now where music is predominantly, Black and African American, which is a fantastic change, because a lot of the music was always being written by people who were Black. It just wasn't always being represented by people who were Black, or there were certain elements that were being taken and sort of ostracized for what would be the most commercial outcome, because at the end of the day, the music business, like any business, is a business, and they wanted to make money, and that was the easiest way for them to make money at those times. So the fact that this representation has increased, I think, is great, and I hope that it continues to increase as we continue to develop and kind of become more aware of these kind of biases. Now, where things kind of come into play here for me, when I was younger, I had a lot of influence through the music that I listened to, but I listened to a variation of music. A lot of it was by Black artists, and I particularly liked jazz and R&B. So a lot of my music was influenced at that time by jazz and R&B artists, and still is. At the time, however, I was more interested in making like electronic club music for some reason. We all go through our phases, and this was just a phase I was going through at that time, I guess. And I was super into like Disclosure and Years, so I wanted to make music like that. So when I was first approached by the very first record label I was on, they were kind of always pushing me to do more R&B music, which at the time, it's like I was always interested in singing these kind of songs. So I was fully aware that, that's what my voice suited, but at the time I was getting more into producing, and I wanted to produce more of these kind of electronic songs. I don't want to do that anymore, and it ended up being just a phase for me, which is fine. But I did notice that, the second that I kind of entered the industry, it was like there was two categories. You were either white and you made music for white people, or you were a person of color and you made music that was going to appeal predominantly to Black people. Because even though Black people are a minority in this country, the way the music industry is set up is that you kind of either are considered a white musician or a Black musician. There's really no in between. So, I was writing music that I liked and I really enjoyed, but I think something that I have to take some culpability to is the fact that there were elements of a culture that wasn't mine that I was utilizing to make this music, and that's just the honest truth. Was I being pushed to do so by the people who were operating whatever labels I was on at the time? Yes, but was I also an adult that kind of had the capability to decide on my own whether or not that was appropriate? Yeah, and I didn't stop it from happening. So nowadays, in modern culture, as I've grown, as I've become an independent musician, looking to expand my own brand, I still often get faced with that initial question of what are you ethnically? People still don't know what I am ethnically by looking at me. And one of the things that is crazy to me is that I even took my music name, which is Samara, Sam Era, split it into two because I went by Sam as a child, and still do as an adult. I just knew that I wanted my musician name to be something with the word Sam in it, and you know, Samara was something that my mom actually came up with, which she felt was fairly ethnic, and I liked that it represented part of my ethnicity too. I just wanted to go by the name Sam, so I split it into two. But people will still message me and ask me, you know, what are you, or what ethnicity are you? And I mean, people are a little bit more appropriate about it now, which is nice. But this brings me down to how do I benefit? So back in those days when I was writing these songs on record labels, and I still, you know, might even skirt the line on this a little bit now, and there's some evaluation I could do there. I think I tried to keep everything as much a representation of myself as I could. But you know, we were listening to Drake say, girls in the 504 need to drop it right now, and then I was throwing in lines in my songs like boys from the 805 and the 714. Like, when, you know, I didn't normally refer to people as by their area codes. That's not part of my culture necessarily. So there was definitely some influence there, but how I benefited was, now if I were a white person saying these things, it may have been more questionable at that time. You know, and you can argue that that's not even the case too, because, you know, there are a lot of white rappers that have said things that are not necessarily representative of their own culture. And the argument is that, you know, they were raised in a certain environment or this or that. But then you also want to say, you know, even back in the days of music, the music industry with Elvis Presley, that was basically taking African American culture and making it something white for monetary commercial consumption. So there's definitely a lot of different things to be argued there. However, me, when you look at me, you can't necessarily tell me that I can't be saying those things or that it's wrong unless you know what I am ethnically, which, you know, I didn't discuss that with people before I released my songs. There were no interviews or people were asking me those questions. And I did do quite a few interviews for magazines online, and no one ever asked me that. So I could have essentially said whatever I wanted to say and no one would have questioned me because, you know, I have some melanin in my skin, which isn't fair. It wasn't necessarily even fair to me either, because I was kind of being pigeonholed in something that I didn't even belong to. So that's not fair to me, and it's also not fair to the people whom that culture does belong to, you know. And taking this back to what we can do now, like how can we find a solution for this? I think we need to learn as a society in America specifically to embrace different variations of cultures and people bringing their cultural representation to the table a lot more openly, and that people would be more comfortable being who they are and not being who they need to be to fill a commercial space. You know, I remember my mom every year when I was a kid would make me dress up in Indian clothes and dance an Indian dance in the school talent show, and I did not enjoy it at all. I was so embarrassed. I was just embarrassed. And I didn't really learn how to bring my culture into my own music and something that is a creative expression of who I am because of that shame and embarrassment that I felt as a child, because it wasn't really accepted where I was being raised and where I was from. And that's nothing to do with my household. It was just the environment that happened at school, which my peers were a huge influence to me growing up. And I do wish now that I could bring some elements of my own culture into my music. But, you know, when I was on record labels and things like that in the past, every time I brought it up, it was like, oh, like, you don't really need to do that because, like, we have, like, a rapper who's Middle Eastern and he's doing that. So don't worry about that. You just do whatever you're doing. And it's just, it's like a shame in some ways, and in other ways, I do feel like I owe an apology to utilizing some of those things to my advantage. I don't think that's right. I don't. And even now, it's like I benefit from being ethnically ambiguous because when brands approach me for deals about this or that, I could be anybody to them. It's like a blank slate, you know? I could appeal to potentially any type of audience that they're looking for. And right now, with the music industry specifically becoming so much more oriented to Black and African American culture, I'm benefiting from that too, because no one's looking at me and saying, hey, you don't belong here. I think that is just something that's toxic to perpetuate, and that we have to embrace each other for our individualism, because even if no one's questioning whether or not you belong, you know that you don't. And it's nice to feel like you do have a place, that you actually belong. And you know, also it's like to the people who this is their culture and this is who they identify as, it is so beyond unfair to take that opportunity away from them. It is so beyond unfair. And I have to apologize, you know, if that's something I have ever done. And, you know I'm sure I've made mistakes in the past, and I have to just continue to educate myself and hope for progress. You know, hope that we make vast changes all together. And this is a very, very difficult line to tread, especially in the music industry. You know, I read an article the other day about, you know, people accusing Bruno Mars of blackfishing, which I'm not going to share an opinion on because I really don't think it's my place to even have an opinion on that. But he makes music that you can say is predominantly influenced by African American culture, and he himself is not in any part African American. And I have to say that I didn't even know that for sure until I read this article. And there you go. There's an example of benefiting from being ethnically ambiguous right there. I didn't know what his ethnicity was, and you know, part of me thought that he was maybe like at least partially Black. I didn't know, and I never bothered to look. And it is a difficult line to tread because as an immigrant and, you know, being raised in a melting pot of cultures, you know, I struggled with identity a lot, and I kind of just picked up what felt comfortable to me. And the time in my life that I felt the most comfortable was when I was in college and I had a Black roommate. I just felt open and I felt comfortable. And I think that made me more adept to picking up that side culturally, especially when it came to creative expression, than anything else that I was exposed to or influenced by as a child. But, you know, the benefit that I had there is that, you know, people didn't know what I was. So it was just an easy way to just not be questioned. But, you know, you should probably be questioning things, you know, whether it's right or not wrong, and what your influence, what your impact creates in society and in the world. And as far as steps that we can make moving forward, I think express yourself naturally the way that you feel comfortable doing so, but also be aware of your privileges. So I may not be the most privileged person in the room on most occasions, but there are definitely certain privileges that I do have that I need to be aware of, and I need to not abuse them, because that's just allowing systemic oppression to continue. I hope that we can all continue to educate ourselves and work towards a better future for everyone, all of our children and everyone. Support your Black businesses, support Black artists, support Black people embracing their culture and owning their culture, and try not to support people who are not of that culture utilizing it solely for monetary gain, because that's abuse of power. I think it could be argued that it is, and this is something that we need to put a stop to. I know this was a heavy and deep video, but it's my first sit-down video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I definitely want to make more videos like this where I can talk more freely and openly on political types of issues with you guys, and I hope you guys have a fantastic night. I love you so much. Thank you so much for following my journey. I appreciate it. Love you guys.